Game of Thrones is wrapping up, and back when I used to be really into the books, I was super into the first four books in that series. Back when I was overseas, I read the first four books while I was in Taiwan, actually, and man, were they good. Part of it, maybe part of it was just that I was starved for material to read in English. I would go to bookstores and you would see, obviously, in Japan, most books are in Japanese. In China, most books are in Chinese. In Taiwan, most books are Chinese. So there'd be one tiny little shelf of English books way in the back. And you just get stuck with whatever you happen to luck out to get. It's difficult to be a reader living in a foreign country where you don't speak the language. But I ended up reading lots of stuff that ordinarily I'd never touch, and it's fun to do that sometimes, because every once in a while you'll get a surprise, and I guess, well, I'll tell you about this, sure, why not? One of the books that I found myself accidentally reading overseas was Watership Down. Did anybody ever read that? Leave a comment if you read Watership Down. Holy shit. This is such a great book. It's a children's book about bunny rabbits who have to leave their rabbit hole to establish a new rabbit colony because one of the rabbits has a shamanic vision that their home is going to be destroyed by construction equipment, by human construction equipment. And so some of the rabbits strike out on their own to form a new rabbit civilization. And it is one of the most amazing books. It is, on a surface level, it's entertaining for children. It's a well-written children's story. But then on a deeper level, it has profound meditations about the human condition. And I'll tell you one part, because I don't think it's too spoilery. It's a little bit. I'm going to give away a tiny, tiny bit about the ending. But I'm going to do that in the hopes that it'll convince people to read the book. And it's actually more interesting if you are aware of this reading the book, if you think about this during the story. So I don't think this is the kind of spoiler that ruins things, but if you don't want to have Watership Down spoiled for you, skip ahead of like 30 seconds or so. The story... During the story, the rabbits have kind of a hero that they have folk tales about. Think of sort of like a rabbit version of Paul Bunyan. You know, somebody like that, somebody who's a folk hero. And whenever the rabbits are in trouble or in danger or something, they think about the stories that were told about their folk hero, and they would use that as inspiration. Well, we know that the rabbit folk hero did X, Y, and Z, and maybe that could give us a cool idea about what we're trying to accomplish on our journey today. And then by the end of the story, these rabbits have accomplished great things and done cool stuff. And they start later towards the end of the story. I'm not going to tell you what happens at the end, but the rabbits who survive the journey are together with other rabbits in the new civilization that they founded. And they are discussing their adventures. And what you slowly begin to realize is that the stories have morphed. The stories aren't about the real rabbits who lived through the adventure anymore. The stories are about the folk hero. The other things that had happened to the rabbits were incorporated into the body of literature about their folk hero. And so the folk hero had become sort of like a way of creating an omnibus of the most important information that the rabbit tribe had accumulated over maybe hundreds or thousands of years of history. And that is one of the most brilliant things that I've ever seen written about mythology ever. And I've read things like Jung, Finch's mythology. I love mythology. I've studied mythology ever since I was a teenager. And it was like, I had come to that kind of understanding, but I didn't know how to say it. It was like sort of a proto-idea that it was in my head. And when I read that in the book, it was so brilliant. And to make the medium of expression a children's adventure story is really a stroke of genius. I can't remember the name of the author off the top of my head, and I apologize for that. But man, what a great idea. I feel like Jordan Peterson should read Watership Down. Do any of you listen to Jordan Peterson? I'm a big fan. Me and a friend of mine, we listen to Jordan Peterson and send each other clips and talk about it and stuff. But I bet Jordan Peterson would love that book, and I bet he'd have some really interesting things to say about it. So maybe tweet Watership Down at Jordan Peterson. So anyway, I was talking about trying to read books in a foreign country. One more anecdote about that. Another book that I was stuck reading was The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. I was in Asia while that whole phenomenon was happening. And I thought that the book itself, well, first of all, it's one of the worst written books that I've ever seen. Dan Brown writes like a college creative writing student, not the content of the stories. His stories are awesome. I actually really like the storylines, but I'm talking about the writing style. His prose is pretty bad. And Dan Brown wrote, in my opinion, the worst sentence that I've ever seen in a professionally published book. And that is this. This is the worst sentence I've ever read. The killer's eyes shone ghostily in the night. That's disgusting. Ghostily is a hideous adverb. Adverbs are the bane of the existence of all writers. They should be banished. And then shone, oh God. I hate words that have weird past tenses. Like, it shouldn't be shown, it should be shined. I'm OCD about the way language works. Sorry about that. But, all right, sorry, I'm getting off on tangents here. I'm getting on tangents away from my tangent. But back to my original tangent, which was about Game of Thrones. So I encountered the Song of Ice and Fire series of novels, of which the first book is Game of Thrones, at that time. And I really devoured them. I thought they were so good. But then about the time where he released a book that only had half the characters in it because he had spent like 6 years writing it and couldn't finish it, I realized, I think, that two things were happening. One was that he sort of lost the plot. I think that he got lost in what was happening and he was just sort of making it up as he went along, and that he wasn't passionate about it anymore. And I feel like some of the interviews that I've seen with him have borne that out. I've seen interviews with him where he was almost contemptuous of the people who were constantly asking him when the next book was going to come out. And I have never and will never be down with that, because I was one of those people anxiously waiting the next book. And I kept reading for a little while, but it lost me. And it seemed like George Martin, I don't want to call him a one-trick pony. He's a really talented writer. But the problem with him is that he uses the technique of throwing an unexpected tragedy at you too often. It was a brilliant technique in the first several books to subvert the cliches of the fantasy genre the way that George Martin does. It was brilliant. It was really brilliant. But at some point, it seemed like the violence and the backstabbing took over from the story and the characters, and the book sort of became about that. And I lost interest in it. And when the show came out, I hate television, and my suspicion was that the show wasn't going to have the budget to actually make the epic, sweeping vision of the books come to life. And I only watched the first 2 episodes, but I felt like my fears were pretty much confirmed. That is what it's like. That's what the show's like, or it was back then anyway. I didn't think it was worth watching, but now I've been wondering, okay, I would be curious to see how the story was supposed to end, so maybe I should watch the last season. But I don't think that I care enough. Every time I have free time, I want to read about the news and politics or study music or whatever. So I think probably I'm not even going to bother to watch the last season of Game of Thrones. I don't care anymore. I'll read the summary on Wikipedia. But I've heard that George Martin has signed a bunch of other deals to develop TV shows with HBO. And I wonder if maybe that's the best thing for him. It seems to me like he's more passionate about creating television than he is about writing books. And artists absolutely need to follow their passion. And so even, George Martin, he seems to me like kind of a jerk, and he has some really bad, cliche, poorly thought out political opinions, but I don't hold any of that against him. What I want to see is artists who are happy, artists who can make the kind of art that they want, who reach the audience who wants to see that art. And if it's art that I personally don't like or enjoy, I don't hold it against anybody. It's just that I pass. And so I will be passing on any HBO TV shows probably. The only TV show holding my interest right now is House of Cards. Even that, House of Cards is pretty great, actually. But even that, I was really excited for the new season to come out, but now it's been out and I haven't watched it yet. Every time I get the chance to sit down and where I would watch it, I would rather read about politics or work on music or whatever. I guess TV just isn't my medium. Maybe I should do a podcast where I talk about Dark Souls. I love the video game Dark Souls, but I think this has gone on far enough. This was a lot of fun. I hope that you have enjoyed this. And I'm gonna separate this out into a separate video when I post on YouTube. So people on YouTube can, they can pick if they want to hear the silly stuff or not, but I don't know. I feel divided by silly stuff, and I guess I'll throw this open to the crowd, to you guys. Do you like it when I talk about my life and personal experience and things? Was this too much? Is this entertaining? There are multiple people who that I know personally who listen to the podcast and watch the show who have told me that I should talk about myself more, and that was where these segments came from. But I feel like I wouldn't want to listen to this. You know what I mean? Like, for me, I'm all business. I tend to be more serious. It's not that I'm not interested in people's lives. It's just I don't listen to Stefan Molyneux because I want to hear about, what he does, what movies he saw. I actually think his movie reviews are the weakest part of his show. But there are people who are requesting this kind of thing. So if you're into this kind of thing and you feel like I'm not doing good at it, or you want to hear me talk about things, or you have any kind of feedback, so let me know what you think about the fun, silly kind of content of the show. Let me know. But I think I've said my piece and it's time for me to go. If you're listening now, especially, I wholeheartedly ask that you would please sign up and follow me on Gab. I really need to build a following on Gab because I'm going to get thrown off YouTube here pretty soon. I think that there's no doubt about that. There's no question. So make sure to follow me on Gab and Facebook and all that shit. So when I start getting thrown off of the big platforms, Gab is going to be the place to go. All right, I'm babbling now. I'm just walking around in circles. So I think that's it. I think that's time to put this one in the can. But I'm really happy to be doing this again.